Years ago, when the woman had left, carrying his child, he never thought twice about the consequences. His wealth and power had always been enough to keep things under control. But now the years had passed, and life had a way of catching up. The man's first words shattered the silence. "I'm here to collect what's mine," he said, his voice steady, yet with a cold edge. The businessman froze. What had he done all those years ago that had come back to haunt him? The businessman's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean? What's yours?" He stammered, trying to keep his composure, though it was clear that the man's presence unnerved him. The stranger remained silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't here for small talk. The tension in the room thickened. Outside the office, the woman's face flashed in the businessman's mind. He had tried to forget her over the years, his former assistant who had been so much more. She had vanished without a trace after she was fired, her pregnancy quickly swept under the rug. But now the man's arrival felt like a reckoning. This wasn't about money, power, or even revenge. It was personal. The stranger leaned forward, his voice low. "You think you can erase people like us from your life? Well, you can't." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "I'm your son." The room fell silent, and the businessman's world tilted. What had he done all those years ago? And why had she never told him? The businessman felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath him. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt powerless. His mind flashed back to that day, the moment he had fired her, convinced she'd never come back into his life. He'd have been ruthless, but this was a different kind of reckoning. His son, his own flesh and blood, standing before him. His eyes searched the stranger's face, desperate for some sign of a mistake, a misunderstanding, but there was none. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside the office. The man's words rang in his ears. "I spent years trying to understand why you did it, why you left us with nothing," he said, his voice growing sharper with every word. "You abandoned me, and now you're going to pay the price." The businessman's thoughts raced. What had he done all those years ago? Why hadn't she told him? Why had she kept the truth hidden? The questions gnawed at him, but the weight of them only seemed to grow heavier. The man's expression shifted, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You think you've built an empire? I'm here to take it all down." The words were like a blade to the heart. The businessman stood frozen, his body tense, barely able to breathe. Was this truly the moment everything would unravel? His son, his enemy, was standing in front of him, and he had no idea how to stop what was coming next. Just as the businessman opened his mouth to speak, the door to his office burst open with a sudden crash. Both men turned sharply, their eyes wide, only to find a familiar face standing in the doorway, his former assistant, the woman from the past, the mother of the man standing before him. She wasn't alone. A man in a sharp suit stood beside her, his expression cold and unreadable. The businessman's breath caught in his chest. "Did you really think you could control everything?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with fury. She stepped inside, locking eyes with the stranger, the son she had kept hidden all these years. "You never understood the full picture, did you?" The businessman's mind spun as he tried to process what was happening. The woman had never told him the truth about her son. And now, after all this time, she was back with a vengeance. But the real shock came when the man in the suit stepped forward, handing him a file. "Everything you've built," the man said, his tone chilling, "was never really yours to begin with." The businessman's heart dropped. What was happening? The truth was spiraling out of control, and he was caught in the middle of a game he hadn't known he was playing. The businessman's hands trembled as he opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents with a growing sense of disbelief. The documents inside were evidence of deals he'd never authorized, accounts he'd never seen, and transfers of money that went far beyond anything he could imagine. His empire, the one he had so carefully built, wasn't just a result of his own hard work. It was the product of a much darker web of manipulation and deceit. The woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and triumph. "You always thought you were the mastermind," she said, her voice low. "But you were just a pawn in someone else's game. And now the truth is finally coming to light." The businessman stared at her, his mind reeling. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your empire was built on lies," the man in the suit replied coldly. "It's not just about the money or the power. It's about the things you did to get here." He paused, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Your son was never the only thing you took from her." For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning as the weight of those words hit him. The woman had never just been an assistant. She had been a part of a much larger plan, one he hadn't even known he was part of. The betrayal ran deeper than he could have imagined. But just as the businessman felt the walls closing in on him, something even more shocking happened. The woman's face hardened, and she turned to her son. "It's time to finish this," she said. The son nodded, stepping forward, but then, in a move no one saw coming, he turned and handed the businessman another document. It was a simple statement: "Your daughter's been alive all these years." The businessman's breath caught in his throat. "What?" he whispered. "You never knew," the woman said, her voice cold. "But she's been waiting for this moment." The files she had handed over were just the beginning. The game was far from over. The businessman sat in stunned silence, the weight of everything crashing down on him. His daughter, the one he thought was lost forever, had been hidden in plain sight all along. The years of lies, the mistakes, the people he had hurt, it all led to this moment. The woman gave him a final, knowing look. "You thought you could erase the past, but it always finds its way back." She turned to her son, her partner in this intricate web of revenge, and together they walked out of the office, leaving the businessman to face the wreckage of his choices. As the door clicked shut behind them, the businessman realized that power and wealth could never shield him from the consequences of his actions. The empire he had built was nothing compared to the family he had destroyed. And in the end, it was love and truth that had claimed victory.